Hello, it's Kevin here. Time for the video again. So this is Cambridge number 9 academic test number 2 writing task 1. As you may or may not know, we're covering every single academic writing task 1 and also 2, but for this series it's task 1. We started in 17, 16, 15, 14, 15, 12, 11, 10 and now we're on number 9. Okay, so first things first. Fair use, disclaimer, non-for-profit, etc. You get the drift. And this is what we're going to be looking at. This is all about the telephone calls, yeah? Total number in minutes, in billions, of minutes in billions of telephone calls in the UK. So, let's have a quick peep and I'll show you my example and we'll take a look at some of the student responses. So, as we can see, local fixed line calls. So, right, as I keep saying, main features, right? Main key features. What's the biggest, what's the smallest, what's unchanged, etc. So, obvious here, local fixed lines are easily the largest in terms of billions, yeah? So, some fluctuation, 75 billion, a peak of 90 billion and back to 75. So, relatively constant, you know, some fluctuations, a peak, but still doesn't fall below 75 billion minutes. The second one, some steady growth year on year. It's about 5 billion or something, 2, 3, 4, 5 billion growth per light minutes year on year, except for the final 2 years. And mobiles, all calls, now while lower in terms of actual numbers of minutes, the rate of growth is easily the largest. Yeah? Well, from about what, 3 million, 4 million up to, what's that, 45? Sorry, million. It's billions, yeah? So, we've got 1, 2, and 3. That's it. That's our 3 key features. That's all we've got to talk about. So, let me get that out of the way. We'll look at mine first, I think. Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay. 193 words. Okay. So, like I say, for your introduction, it's just a sentence. Don't have to spend a lot of time. The chart, map, a data graph, process shows, blah, 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 blah. You need to paraphrase it a bit, but I won't stress out about that. Important, well, right, obviously though, don't simply copy it out. Don't copy and paste it out, because if you copy and paste it out, they'll cross it out. So you've got to change it to some extent, but still, you don't have to change every single word. I've got some videos on the channel, if you're watching it on YouTube, where I talk about how you can do that. Okay, so anyway, overview. Overall, despite some minor fluctuations, landline, most common. Second, national international calls, fixed line, show some growth. The strongest increase in mobiles, despite placing third in the rankings in terms of numbers. Okay, so now figures and details. Just over 70 billion minutes were spent. After this, 5 billion, peaked at 99. Okay, so the biggest comes first, then the second and the third. I won't bother to read it all out. You can see it for yourself. But again, all I've done, I've said, right, first, second, third, and then I've gone into the details. Yeah, figures, dates, etc. And that's it. 193 words. Right, that's pretty much it. Now let's have a look. What have we got here? So, first 5 I take and I make a comment on. Right, 183 words. Actually, if you saw the previous one, Cambridge 9 test number 1, quite a few of those were too short. Less than 150, 138, what was it, 140 something, 150, you know? So you want to try and get over 150. Most of these are about, what, 180, 190, 225, that's a little bit long, but 230 per 184. So if it's too short, it's not really, you know, enough. So 3 call types. Okay, that's good. Now, salient calls were about and local ones. Well, the most noticeable calls were not about, they were. And salient means that which is noticeable. So the most noticeable calls were about local ones. Doesn't really work. Simply tell me what's the biggest, what's the smallest, etc. Now, it looks like they've put the overview. Now, I keep up saying this. Right, overall, overview. It's not an underview, it's an overview. What's it doing at the bottom? I don't know. Be proportional to both types of the whole period, second, third, respectively. Okay, so that's more or less. I mean, that would be better. Why couldn't you just put that in paragraph 2? During the years, what about local ones? Well, okay, we don't really need that. Turn of centuries. Now, right. What does that mean? Right, so figures and data. That's a little bit vague. So, the most noticeable calls were about local calls. Before the turn of a century, you mean in 1995. A significant positive correlation, which means what? Depends if I think about the first amount. So that paragraph doesn't really work at all. As for the second largest number of telephone calls, well, it wasn't the largest number of calls. It was the largest in terms of minutes. So the total number in minutes. So it's not the total number of telephone calls, as in like there were 1 billion calls made. It's a total number of minutes of those calls, right? So that's not the same thing, yeah? So let's go back. So most telephone calls actually consistently during the year started about 40, about 60 what? It's billion minutes. Mobile calls increased markedly, and so needs a bit of attention there. Let's have a look. Information. I would have said what it was. Billions of right. It's not the amount of telephone calls. That's again. Let me have a look at it. There's something wrong with my eyesight. So UK telephone calls by category, right? So it's not the number. So I could make one call for 1 billion minutes. Obviously, well, you know, I kind of couldn't, but still, there could be one call. Well, if I called somebody in 1995 and I left it ringing, I left it on the hook till 2002, it might be 1 billion minutes. But anyway, it's not the total number of calls, it's the total number of minutes of telephone calls. So you could have 10 telephone calls lasting a minute each, or you could have 10 telephone calls lasting 20 minutes each. So that would be 200 minutes. So it wouldn't be 10 calls, it would be 200 minutes. So you need to be careful there. And you know, what's the amount? How's it measured? Because when you do this, right, you've got the rubric, right? The chart shows telephone calls, call like type, blah blah blah. You've got what's on the x-axis, minutes in billions, and what's on the y-axis, what's the period, what's the years in this case. So you need to put this information in, if possible. So it's not the amount of telephone calls, it's the amount of time spent on telephone calls, not the same thing. Local calls most significant share of call. Again, it's not share of calls, is it? Okay. Except local class. So that overview, really, what? So local calls most significant share. Okay. All categories except local. So what does that mean? So all categories witnessed an increase except for local call, but you just said that all categories. So how can it be except? So surely that's a contradiction. So significant share, okay, but that's anyway. So that doesn't really work out, does it? It's a contradiction. All categories witnessed an increase. There's only 3 categories, so all categories, except this one. So you mean 2 out of the 3. So that's not all categories, is it? Local call size proportion, 70 billion minutes, local class, gradual increase, okay, there's a period, okay, that's good. Initial value, mobile to the last week, 3 billion, okay, so that's not too bad, and I wouldn't use that. BM, is that supposed to be billions of minutes? Okay, so that doesn't really work, and it's not the amount, it's not the number of calls, it's the amount of time spent on calls, which again is not the same thing. Right, let's have a look. Spent on telephone calls, 3 different categories. So, British people spent on telephone calls, 3 different categories. How much time they spent? It should be time, really, isn't it? From another perspective, local calls from fixed lines, same at the beginning, increased from fixed line were more than calls from that. Right. Again, what's the biggest? What came second? What came third? What's the smallest? What's unchanged? Etc. That's the key trends and features, yeah? Dominant figure. From fixed lines, sort of decrease. Okay. In terms of growing the figures, there was a gradual rise of both national and international calls made from fixed lines. Okay, 60 billion respectively, at a negligible 4 billion. 4 billion minutes is negligible? Okay. Had surged. 2002, lower international fixed line. Right, so that's again. You need to organise your information in a logical progression. That's what the criteria says. That's not particularly logical. It's jumping about back and forth. So again, that's, right. I'll have to talk about this again. So, that's the biggest. That's the second. That's the third. Some fluctuation. That showed steady growth. That showed significant growth. So that's it, yeah? That's all that you're going to do. So, bar chart straight on because UK, networks. Volume. It's not volume, is it? It's amount of time. Volume means number. Okay. First glance. Why at first glance? Were ascending. Increasing or increased. Okay. Go fixed line steady increase. Conversely, alright. Contrast values initially low. This is good. Alright. Usage lower than fixed line. So you're making comparisons there because it does say make comparisons if relevant. So that's good. Click increase. So this is kind of an overview though. So we don't really need that there. I mean, okay, so 230 words. It's a little bit long, and a bit more. So this is not too bad. Probably the best one that I've seen so far. But I would rearrange that information a little bit. One, we don't need 230 words. And you've kind of got like an overall view here, and you've kind of got like an overall view here at the end. Is this a conclusion? Well, there's no need to do it twice. Bar charts, information, proportion of minutes. In an overall look, you mean overall? Well, more of a types of call in all years. National Intelligence was witnessed increases throughout the years. Okay, that's kind of identified it. You could have put a little bit more in. Sustained its numbers. Local lines sustained their numbers. Highest volume on all groups. Gradual rise of statistics. That's it. 60 billion, 2 mobile calls. Massive jump. In addition, relative order of the figures remained unchanged in the last year. What? So you mean what was first, second, and third at the start was still first, second, and third at the end. Is that it? Okay, so not too bad, not too bad. Right, I'll just put mine on before I go, so you can have a quick peep at it. So, don't forget, wherever you see this, links to the Telegram group and the discussion box in the comments box, etc. Join us on Outline Pro, a Telegram link there. If you're watching on YouTube, okay, if you're watching on Apparat or whatever. So, I'll see you next time for Cambridge 9 test number 3. Okay? Bye for now.